And
And I should tell my wife to bring me a shirt so that way people. So, welcome to Late Night with Rex. This is Rack Apocalypse. I'm currently having camera difficulty, so you will only see the cool, picture vibrating on the screen. This is Hollow. Go ahead and
sure.
introduce yourself.
So, my channel name and general alias is Hollow Wanderer. My name's Paul, and yeah, just chilling with Rex.
So, basically, what we have been talking about is taking modern day weaponry, um, for example, modern day handguns, submachine guns, rifle, and applying them to your role playing system. Some of the tools that I wind up using is a combination of Altor Sorian's compendium of modern day firearms. I recommend that any GM own this book because it will come in handy if you're doing modern day weaponry. If you're doing Palladium, I would then recommend the compendium of contemporary weapons. That's an easy one to come across, and surprisingly enough, Wiki. And pretty much the main thing that your players need to know is basically what's the caliber around and what's the rate of fire. And they can give you do that two bits of information. You can pretty much help your player pick any modern gun they can think of and apply it. Shotguns are a little bit more unique because usually a shotgun is one shot per round, or if it's a double barrel, two shots if you have both sides cocked. But there has been some interesting things have developed with shotguns. Like shotguns now have warheads. Did you hear about that?
No, no, I didn't at all.
Yeah,
Do tell, do
actually,
tell.
yes. Basically they have come up with I think it's called the frag round, and basically it is put into a regular shotgun shell, but when you fire it, it deploys basically a warhead out of the barrel, and can potentially have low end and high end explosive packed into it. So you could either breach a wall or blow up a car with a shot from a shotgun. They've also come out with shotgun rounds. The Governor, Western Governor, is actually made by Swiss and Wesson, and that shoots shotgun shells. So there's all sorts of nice little things your character can have to make themselves look really cool and badass. So yeah, for people who like play Spycraft and Ninja and Super Spies and modern day settings and likes to have lots like and likes to be gun bunny, this would be my recommendation when it comes to everything's really outdated. Take get the reference books and you're good to go.
That's just badass. The fact that you can have a freaking warhead in your shotgun, or even a governor, just that is so cool.
Yeah, I mean I like running games where in which I mean usually I like being the demolition guy. I like blowing stuff up. So I tend to stay I wouldn't say completely current on everything, but enough to know, okay, I need to know what a debt cord is and stuff like that there and C4 and other version of plastique and especially if you're doing something like the Born Identity or MacGyver style like
Mhm.
character, you need to know what household chemicals is what if you're gonna. I like role playing. I just don't like saying I'm gonna do this. I like to ask my GM what's in the room there, and then I'm going to be like, so is there this, this, and this, and they roll for it. And they're like, yes, you have this. So I'm going to take this, this, and this, and I'm going to make napalm. What
Definitely.
do I need to roll? And then there's like, roll your demolition skill. I roll it, and if I succeed, I make homemade napalm. And then I get to describe how people get covered in flames and burn and screaming. It's great.
Especially
Hence
in a
the
modern
reasons.
setting, it's just a lot more relatable. People can relate to that a lot easier.
Hmm.
So it's nice when you have your GM describe those kinds of things, so that you can even say, "Look, I'm a demolitions expert." Something that I wish personally was more in games, because that's just badass. It's cool. Um, but to be able to say, "Look, I'm trying to make napalm," or "This is what I'd like to do," what are the chemicals or things that are in here, or so that you can carry duct tape around. So if you want to, you can take a flashlight and just wrap it around your gun, or just all these cool combinations using basic items.
The way I look at it is, if you got a GM that all has watched any action play, they got to know that there's going to be that scene in the movie or television show where the hero is got bad guys coming and he has X amount XYZ time. If the player is really into his character and got the skill set, he should totally try to see if there a room with cleaning supplies and he's in there making up a bunch of stuff and then goes out to the local kitchen and stick a bunch of stuff into the microwave, set a timer and run. And yes, I totally stole that from a Steven Seagal movie, and I don't care because it's awesome.
That is, think of like homemade flamethrowers. You can do some cool stuff. Get some Home Alone action going
Oh
on in
yeah,
there.
that consists of like basically a can of Febreze and a lighter,
Yeah.
and call it good.
But
And
it's
also,
cool stuff.
and it also works well when you're dealing with zombie games like Dead Rain or All Flesh Must Be Eaten. You can have your survivors come across these miscellaneous supplies, and in a pinch, they make stuff happen. Like I would say, a great source material, people will think I'm crazy, is the combination that you can make in what was that name of that one game, Dead Rising, where you take basically duct tape and put a bunch of nails around it and basically throw the propane tank in the squad into a crowd and blow a bunch of zombies up with shrapnel damage.
That's actually a really good video game to use as a reference for this because they have crazy combinations in there that can really inspire some great ideas for player creativity. Just getting something new in there, and it's also a point for GMs to include things that can be used for that kind of gameplay or combining things. Because often, even I've done this, I just leave things kind of bare in rooms. Um,
Mm.
as I've gotten more experienced, even in fantasy systems, I like to just throw mundane items, just stuff that on its own doesn't have much value. But if you're able to find something else to combine it with, you can create something that's a lot more impactful. And it's really fun and rewarding to do that as a player.
And I mean, if you're dealing with a group, and I'm not trying to say that some players are dumb, but if you have a bunch of players that have like high level intelligence where they can know how chemistry or alchemy works and they can figure out how to make Greek fire with stuff from the herb shop or chemical shop, that stuff should totally happen. And it doesn't have to be like completely dead on or whatever else, but if they know, if they can send you a note saying that it's this, and this in the room, and it's just all modern day stuff, or just normal stuff that's generally lying around, then I would then have to determine A, can you make a success, determine the role that is needed to see if you combine these correctly, or do you have the typical poof of smoke in your face and you're covered in smut, or your eyebrows are burnt off.
Hmm.
So, that's another thing. I mean, this is just doesn't apply to just modern day games. You can do this for technically D&D, Pathfinder, what have you, because even back then, they had access to certain chemicals that, if you combine correctly, make some cool stuff. Especially if you're doing something like in the Oriental Adventures, you can come across how to make basically gunpowder.
Hmm. Definitely. Not only that, but if you have trouble looking for chemicals or coming up with ideas for what would be able to use for you'd be able to use for these kind of combinations, if you just Google in explosive chemicals or explosive chemical combinations or acidic kind of items that can cause a certain reaction, you'll find tons of resources, tons of them.
And then, I mean, another thing, like if you're dealing with different dragon, like if you're dealing with like a black worm dragon,
Hmm.
if the character says like I want to remove the acid sac from the dragon and put it in a flask, I would totally let that happen. He would have to roll to make sure that he doesn't a burn his weapon off or burn his damn hand off when he's trying to extract just the acid sac. But yeah, if he can get the acid sac out and get it pour the corrosive material into a flask, couple of flasks, that totally can happen.
Definitely. And it's just imagine like grabbing the acid sack and throwing it at someone. Like someone's
Hmm.
instinct is going to be just to grab it. So as they like grab it, it explodes all over them. That's just like a nasty ass thing that you could have happen.
Hmm.
But you can even make up your own combinations. Like in a fantasy world, you could take the effects of a spell. Um, Maybe if you wanted to, you could, I don't know, lay on hands or burning hands, chill touch, some of the other really common spells. You could compact those in an item or allow people to combine like specific herbs or minerals or something to create their own explosive versions of those. Or like you open the flask and you point it somewhere, and
Hmm.
that kind of sends out a gust of like frigid air, like even stuff that freezes. You could have numbing agents that paralyze people, status effects, man, cool stuff, and that applies to pretty much any system. You can have that happen.
And I mean, especially if you're playing the Ranger class, and this became, and I only know a little bit about Ranger due to Drizzt Do'Urden and the Forgotten Realms novels. There, being an herbalist and being out in the woods, a ranger could pretty much come find all these weird herbs and whatnot in the world that can either heal or poison or what have you. So, rangers really have access to more than just a bow and the typical ranger gear. I mean, if they really look into their skill set and use their skills, they can come up with some pretty nasty thing where they can like take XYZ root and crush it up while they're talking to the mayor as they're having drinks, and you have him pass out as they complete the rest of their mission or what have you, or pass along to another player to have them put it in the drink as
There's
you
even
know.
go ahead, man. You go ahead.
Oh no, no, go ahead.
So, a couple ideas that just flashed into my mind. You could also have your ranger in their terrain that they're best at. Find things like chilies, um, and just crush those things up and throw them at people's eyes, blind them. Um, you can also even have them make stuff that like ensures that food lasts longer. So maybe there's some way of mixing these two elements and making a kind of waxy film that you can dip your rations in to make them last longer. If
Or
you're
actually, like basically, you would do rangers would probably, or depending on the person's skill level, curing meat, basically involving the
Mhm.
process of salting and drying out meat accordingly. Could be another safe safe aspect. I mean, it really depends on how in depth your character wind up being. I've listened to a lot of YouTube channels as of late, and a lot of them are talking about instead of just doing the role per se, and then just say like you do this, why not describe what you're doing? And these are things that you can have going on. Because in between adventuring to town, you can have them go hunting at some point. It doesn't have to be but you have them go out and look for food, so the ranger can be doing something while the rest of them are talking.
Exactly, and that
Or
brings me to go ahead. Go
no,
ahead.
you go first.
That makes me think of a video that DBJ put out about why role play. And one thing that I've always done is kind of force people to say, "Okay, you're doing this check. Why? What is your character actually doing?" And why I do that is because, and how I frame it is, what does everyone else see, or how does this look? So that you kind of build these. Everyone can visualize what's happening, whereas if you don't, then everything just becomes about the system. It kind of takes something away from what could be a really neat cinematic moment. I mean, you look at Die Hard. There, there's scenes where they're crafting items, and it's just focusing on this epic moment of like making a pipe bomb or anything of the nature. Crafting things can be a really interesting, cool, neat moment for everyone else. And as you were saying, give that individual something to do while everyone else is busy with something.
Yeah, actually, the video that I was speaking about was done by a YouTuber by the name of David Braun Jackson.
Yep, DBJ.
Yeah, and I really like the stuff that he's put out so far. It makes me really want to step my game up as far as how I should do my describe because I like to do cinematic role role playing, not just roll your dice and whatever. If anyone's seen my Splicer video, I'm very descriptive in the way I have things worked out in my game, and I pretty much I'm going for a combination of definitely some Clive Barker influences and definitely some H.R. Geiger and Guyver because I'm a big Guyver fan. So, like the buildings, houses are very much H.R. Geiger, very dark and sinister looking because this is a dark, creepy world, and the
Hmm.
towns are overall more serious than not. But I'm looking for them epic, tie-ins where when they say they have to go to XYZ, I want to make it look like have a descriptive, like almost novel-like or movie-like as they're going through, and then they have their encounters on the way. But I also want them to have like interaction or role playing and what have you, and then continue on, and then we blow stuff up on the way. And luckily, I got a group of players, Robert Ogre and Andrew uh, Mitchell, who are totally down for that. We're actually pretty much assembling, and Dennis, we're pretty much they're on the path of trying to become the four horsemen of the apocalypse, which I find to be interesting and yet cool. So I put pretty much as the tagline as the series continue. Once I find someone can make up some graphic stuff for me, like in the Wizard of the Wasteland role campaign I'm in. Will they be the saviors of the humanity or the damnation of humanity? And go from there. Because when I originally came up with the concept of the camp of the Four Horsemen, they were supposed to be a bunch of crazy psychos who uh, a, that basically a house because in splicers you have different houses and tiers and whatnot. The house, the guy basically stumbled across a burnt up copy of a Bible, and he come across Revelations, reads it, and pretty much determined that these are the last days, and create the four horsemen to pretty much do the cleansing process. So these guys are like epic, pretty much close to max level, and they go across the battlefield, death on the battlefield, killing everything off that's machine, but also killing all the humans off in the process because he's thinking it's time to just wipe the slate clean. So it's a question. So I'm modifying that concept to see based upon their choices or what they do, whether or not they wind up being the damnation of humanity in my Splicer game.
And that actually kind of brings me to another reason for description is to reinforce a theme as a GM, and help convey that to your players. Often I've had players mimic similar kinds of descriptions after I've described several scenes in a certain flavor. And like you were saying, Juve, with the kind of theme that you're going for with the apocalypse, the four horsemen of the apocalypse, that's something that could be really conveyed in all of your descriptions as well to give off this the same motif.
Hmm. And that's what I'm currently trying to work on. I mean, some of the difficulties with being a role player and a GM with a learning disability, like the ones I have dysgraphia and to be honest, a little bit of ADD, is to try to sit down and do the note taking and whatnot to actually keep everything together. Because realistically, if you're a good GM, they're going to run across other players or other NPCs that's going to give them a piece of information and whatnot, and you need to have that written down so later on you have a point of reference, similar to that. like in combos where they have the giant book that you give to writers before they write a story with everything that's happened with that particular character and who they ran in with. I pretty much feel you should have to do the same when you're doing a campaign or whatever when you're doing in role playing. So I got notes here and there, but I wound up doing a lot of basically on the spot monologue of what I have a general idea of what I know I want them to do, and then I pretty much come up from there. And then after a while, I'll have them run into an encounter. But what I really would like to have happen is a lot more, and they doing fine, and they're doing great. Is to emphasize more of the role playing aspect of the game versus blowing stuff up less hackmaster and more theater of the mind, as people like to refer to it as.
And along with the keep having something to reference, instead of notes, you can even do like you brought up a couple movies or artistic directors and whatnot for movies. Even keeping in mind like the scenes of something you're trying to recreate. Say you want to recreate Aliens 2 and kind of the theme that's going on there and the imagery. You could maybe think of the Hive, just having a frame of reference that way. Maybe a good an alternate route to remembering, keeping things consistent thematically. But I know I usually at the end of every session make a write up of what's happened in in that particular session, so that I myself can look back later at those notes and go, these were my strong points. These were really good sessions. These are things that I felt I did well. Um, I also do have my players fill out feedback sheets or just give me a structured idea of what you enjoyed, what you didn't like, what I can improve on, and any suggestions, and why. Um, and that
Actually,
allows me to, in combination, look back on those sessions and help me move forward to build better games in the future.
yeah, what I basically that's why I like the Hangouts because my next game session will wind up being a live game session. So I will wind up having it recorded. So what I can do is go back to my channel and then review um, what happened in the game. So that's pretty much become my digital note taking for the course of the game because I could pretty much just watch the game over again and pick out the points and stuff that I need to reference.
That's one of the best ways to do it because you have the session right there. You know exactly what things were like. You can kind of revisit that, and even subtle cues like where people are looking, their tone of voice, how engaged they seem to be in the game, can tell you, give you a way of measuring how good you were, how well you were keeping people's attentions and keeping them interested in the game. Um, that it's not always true, but it's often something to look for because people don't always say that they don't like something or that they're kind of bored. Um, so it's sometimes easier to look at someone's body language and say, okay, these guys are looking kind of bored right now. Let's stop the talking. Let's have a fight to get people's blood pumping. Or these guys have been through a ton of fights. They're not particularly looking for a fight. So let's look at some other kind of gameplay that we can implement here.
Hmm. And I do like how Vampire the Masquerade. Because I know we're jumping around to a bunch of stuff, but the general thing is like in-depth storytelling is like Masquerade. I always found fascinating because I played a character one time that basically was nothing but political actions. He had tons of money, influence, and everything else, and he just had minions do the work for him. And he basically was kind of like Tombstone for Marvel Comics. He had basically wherever he touched, basically automatically chilled. And then he had his girlfriend that was kind of like the succubus type. And then I had a yes man, and then I had my pretty much two ogre grunts. And all I really carried around was a cane that had a silver walking sword cane with that was silver tip. I mean silver coated, and yeah. And I had the typical 1911 in the side, and I basically played the mobster who intimidated everybody accordingly with his grunts. So it was great. I would send my girlfriend out to seduce people and ravage them accordingly, and yeah, it was great times.
I'm interested about that actually. What was it like to play a villain character? Sending out your minions to do your work.
Oh, I have
Um,
played many villains, and it really comes down to one, you need to talk to your GM about the level of villainy that they are comfortable with, because you can go from I read Clive Barker's work, so and Ivan Tihar and the Kebab macabre things and criminal minds and stuff like that there. So I'm like, how in depth do you want this villainy to go? Because you can have someone as vile that's into doing pedophilia, and you yourself is not that type of person in real life, but you're doing role playing. So you have to one. I tell anybody, if you're gonna do like a true evil character, find out what level of evil your GM and the other players are comfortable with. Because I've actually scared. I think even during I did scare somebody during a bridge con with one of my characters, because I basically was describing how this guy was constantly making gesture with his straight razor, and talking about alluding to the fact that he's killed his father. I pretty much he was prepared to deal with the evil of Cthulhu, but not the evil of humanity. And see, to me, in a Cthulhu game, you have to have a little combination of both. That's why I bought this one supplement called "The Stars Are Right," and this basically the campaign or the one shot I might be doing is involving basically an opium den, and all the characters got all these basically bad backstories. Some are maybe war veterans, and it just goes from there. Well, in this book, you got a little bit of everything. In the new millennium, I just give you a quick description. The new millennium time wrapped with violence, racism, AIDS, drug abuse, and all-consuming fear, and hollow politicians offer empty promises and a bright future, 1,000 points of light which none can see. See, that alone pretty much, and then you throw that disparity, and then you add in elder gods, and you got a pretty interesting story. My storyline is going to pretty much commence of you're in the opium den and you're smoking what you think is opium, and actually you're smoking the essence of an elder god that the cultists are passing out to people, and slowly the process is to drive you insane while he consumes your soul as you smoke him.
that's just badass. That's a creative way to start things. But I think you hit on a really good point there. That was about discussing with your GM what kind of level of comfortability you have with certain acts that are generally deemed evil or vile or bad in today's society. Because if you don't communicate those, your GM might go into that territory, or other players might go into that territory where you're uncomfortable, and you might do the same to someone else without knowing it. But also as a GM, knowing whether you are going to approach certain subjects or not, what kind of campaign you're going for, what kind of game you're trying to run. Is it going to be something that has a lot of these stereotypical good doers who are trying to make the world a better place? Are looking at something that's a little more neutral where people are just trying to survive? Are they trying to fulfill their needs, whether those be drugs, sex, just alcohol? Maybe they just need to work. They're a workaholic kind of character, or maybe you go into some other vile, more despicable things, just like plain out murder or serial killers, like you brought up pedophilia, rapists. Those are the kinds of subjects that
That you
you
have to
need to
really be
discuss.
careful. You have to be careful, and that's a combination, because if you have female gamers, and let's be honest, at times I've seen this personally where GMs do not take into account that there is a female at the table, and they go into subject matter that, let's be honest, rape or what have you, that person is just not comfortable with. Um, yeah, that's the stuff that you have to be aware of. And like I said, I generally, if I'm playing, and I played in the evil campaign before, I basically ask, what level of stuff are you comfortable with? Because I was a necromancer, so I asked like, if I'm a necromancer and I'm like completely evil, is necrophilia allowed? Is pedophilia allowed? Because I was planning to corrupt and abuse children as another way of my sadistic ways and whatnot. Because I was playing to the death god in 3.5 and trying to become basically a lich, full out, blown out lich. So so he's like, we talked about, it, and he's like, okay, the necrophilia, that's fine. I'm nobody in our group because everyone got kids here or have kids want that covered, and we really don't want in depth, mutilating children. And I'm like, okay, that's fine. So basically, my character was basically had a bunch of children that he has turned into savages that he would use as attack dogs that were all on chains. And then I had one orphan that actually had my actual heart that I dropped off in some no-name village so I couldn't be killed.
Nice.
So basically I transplanted, or I don't know how the spell worked, but I basically took my own human heart and put it inside of the kid. So that way, no matter what you did to me to try to kill me off, I wouldn't die. You have to find the kid, kill the kid, to actually get that done. And if you're a hero, killing a child is a big, like, traumatic type thing. So, especially if the kid doesn't, and the kid is not even aware that he even has it. So it just goes from there. So, and it worked out pretty well. People were saying, you play evil quite well. I'm like, I've had great inspiration over the years of film. So yes, I do know depths of evil. I mean, I could do the typical evil character just plotting to take over the world, and he might kill people here and there. And then you have like the Hannibal Lecter style evil, where there's levels of deep, gratuitous violence and blood and gore. So it's really come down. I told him it really comes down to what the overall party is comfortable with. Because when it comes down to it, you're doing this for fun. You're not doing this to make people go vomit in the trash can as you describe how you're doing stuff. It's supposed to be basically for fun, and that's what it should generally be. And
Definitely.
sometimes it goes horribly, horribly wrong, which I've seen that happen as well.
Yeah, I think everyone's had some mishaps, that's for sure. But
So, what has been your biggest mishap during a
I
game?
actually have some other comments related to your own to what you've said because you brought up some good stuff, man. Um, Relating initially to the kind of taboos that you have, um, I personally don't think that it's related to gender and just more individual experiences. Like for me, I only have one boundary, and for me that's pedophilia because I do have that hits home personally, and that's something I don't like to approach. But anything else, I'm fine. And there are different
Yeah,
gradients for people. Um, but also when it comes to playing evil characters, often I find that people do not consider that evil people don't think they're evil. They have a motive of their own, and they think that they're right, or they're simply fulfilling a need of theirs. Often you see these stereotypical villains that are just sitting there like, yes, it's time to take over the world, and picking the brain style. And that's really cartoony stuff. But as
but
we've brought up some of the
like,
subjects, it can get
yeah,
really dark.
yeah, like for example, Superman Returns, or no, Man of Steel, where you had General Zod. Zod typically could, even though he's an evil character, he himself think he is a good person because he's just fulfilling what he think he's supposed to be doing in life, which is ensuring and protecting the people of Krypton. Earth just happened to be in the way of that happening, and so is Superman. So he's thinking that he's doing right, but in actuality, he's being evil, and that's like a prime example of that concept you just brought up.
Yeah, and they're the best villains usually, the best stories because they're so great because it brings into question what's good, what's evil, why are we fighting one another, do we need to fight? Because that could be interesting. Maybe there's a way that your villain and your antagonist, or your protagonist and antagonist, can compromise with one another. You can have some really interesting stuff go on.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen it a lot. I mean, I'm a big anime fan, so currently I'm watching Fairy Tail, and there was this battle between these two guys. They were both using ice magic, and one which wanted to bring back this demon so he could suppress his teachers, um, so he could finally suppress his teacher by killing the demon off. And the local people that this demon's town, where basically the demon destroyed their town, they all joined him to revive this demon and bring him back. And the other hero character pretty much said to him, like, you can't defeat him. And when you look at the dynamic of the whole effect, you got one group of people thinking they're doing right because they're going to actually kill this demon off for the sake of revenge, and then you got the hero character trying to convince the villain that, hey, I understand what you're trying to do, but you're doing great atrocities in the process. And that's the type of stuff that I'd like to try to incorporate in my role playing sessions if I can pull it off.
That's a good point. Maybe the villain doesn't know all the pain that they've caused and all the shit that they've done and its consequences, its long-reaching consequences. And maybe at the end of everything, they stop and go, holy shit, I didn't even know that I was causing all of this mayhem. I was just trying to do this. I had an innocent desire. And that I'd gone so far off, and that character could likely just kill themselves due to the amount of anguish and guilt, which could be a little more humanizing than the stereotypical yes kind of character.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like the way my world organized is kind of like you got, because the way splicers were set up, they had these houses, and of course, with Game of Thrones out, I pretty much understood how inside houses politics work. So there you got this whole thing of you might be having people that are working, that the characters' house that they're in are actually working against each other for whatever they consider to be the good for the house. So they might commit a bunch of atrocities saying they're helping the house when they're actually potentially weakening it or what have you.
Exactly. And that actually kind of brings me to a couple of good points. Just when it comes to villains, they're people. They had a childhood. They probably had family. Someone had to have raised them. So what was that like for them? Why do they think the way they do? You can have all kinds of villains. Some that are the stereotypical, methodical, in the background, getting henchmen to do things, and they have several stages of a plan. But you can have more of these chaotic styled, acting out emotionally kind of villains, to create a wide variety of interests in the kind of antagonists you create. Um, and going to the point of antagonists that do not believe they're evil. Um, a novel that I've been working on for a while has an antagonist who lost, at an early age, lost his entire gypsy tribe that he grew up in, an Irish gypsy tribe, due to a comet that hit the ground, which was actually an alien spacecraft. This is set in the real world, but a post-apocalyptic future of Canada. And this villain comes in contact with this alien that is inside the craft, whose skin cannot deal with oxygen. He burns up and kind of shrivels because his body can't handle oxygen. But the antagonist is able to telekinetically speak with this alien, and it shows him visions of a world that is returned to an age similar to ours, maybe even further back, a sort of Eden, and that all of his friends and family will come back to life, so long as he gathers these artifacts and brings them to a place. He doesn't quite know exactly all of that, as he's in search of someone who can commune with these aliens so he can get further direction of what he's supposed to do next. He wants to revive his family, his brothers, his sisters, his friends, and he wants to bring the world back to a place of peace and harmony beyond this frigid, icy post-apocalypse, and the hell that's been wrought by nuclear weapons and whatnot. But in the process of what he's doing, he ends up kidnapping other characters, laying waste to other towns. He becomes a sort of sex slaver and just a really mean individual, but he still, at his core, has the desire to bring back the ones he loves. Um, and even the protagonist does not have a direct hatred for the antagonist. There's
Mm-hmm.
just their paths collide, and it just happened. And people are having to deal with the consequences. And that's just a far more interesting point of view to approach antagonists. Because how can you? It's a lot harder to deal with someone who has reason, who you can understand to a degree and empathize with, knowing that they've done wrong, but for some reasons that maybe even you can justify.
Yeah, and that's the type of role playing and thing that thinks outside the box, which I come back to that gentleman that I was speaking of,
Again?
DBJ.
Yeah.
Yeah, with the way he describes making things more of the theater mind and make it more in depth, because I tend to like that style of role playing. The thing that people always like when I was role playing in my groups back in Portland was the fact of how vested my characters was and how they had all the different personalities. And I said that pretty much if I'm going to role play and gonna sit down here for 6 to 8 hours, I need to at least make it entertaining for both myself and the people around me, so I don't sit here and fall asleep because I'm bored out of my mind. And they generally start laughing because they're like, "Yeah, you got a point." So I'm like, so everybody from seeing how I did my role playing stepped their game up accordingly, and it was just always potentially majority of the time good time. But then there was other instances where, oh god, the level of the thing that I don't like in gaming is rule loring. Is like,
Oh
okay,
God. Let's. Oh God. No.
oh yeah, I don't do rule loring. I generally, if I can't figure out a rule within 5 or 10 minutes, bogging crap down, and you'll see that in the Slicer game. I didn't follow exactly dead on the point of how the combat system supposed to work. I made the combat system where it was engaging, it got stuff done, but I didn't want it to be like this all encompassing thing. And if someone didn't know, if I didn't know a specific rule set, I'm like, just roll off on it and just let us move on. Because if I can't figure it out within 5 minutes, I'm just going to say roll a d20 or roll a percentile and then just go move on. It's the ones that will sit there and try to dig through the books and blah 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 and this and this. Or you
Exactly.
have the player who is the micro GM that if you didn't ask them to be a co GM, they're just supposed to be a player.
I think
And
everyone's
it's
had an experience like that. You bring up like the micro GM, rules lawyers. They're so often combined. I mean, but oddly enough, and this topic was brought up by Juice in one of his posts that got a lot of attention, or GM Juice, and in my experience, it's more about personality and expectations, bridges of expectations. There's a certain level of common courtesy and respect that you have to have when you approach a game or you're invited to a game, and the GM is the one that has to put in the most effort. I don't agree with this concept that the table cannot be owned by the GM because often they're the person who invites you over. Sometimes they get you snacks. They have to contact everyone to get things set up, build
mm-hmm,
an adventure, contact people to build characters, help them through the creation process, reschedule nights if things don't work out, update people if someone's not going to arrive or they're arriving late,
mm-hmm.
create synopsis. There's a lot of stuff that goes into GMing compared to being a player. So when it comes to DMs who are facing micro GMs and rules lawyers, you're the one as the GM who has the power and the final say. What you say goes. I've had a scenario where a friend of mine, who I'd known for years, never played a tabletop RPG, but he was one of the most hardcore rules lawyers I'd known. Just it was in his bones, and I stopped inviting him to games because of this. Because we would sit down for half an hour to an hour discussing a fucking rule, and That's not worth it in my opinion. You're wasting everyone's time. You're wasting their gas. You're wasting their effort to come out to the game. Like Juve, you were talking about everyone sitting around for 8 hours, sitting there going. It's not fucking worth it. Let's make the game fun. If you plan on pausing the game, if what you're gonna say and your little but is gonna pause the game, please keep it to yourself and wait till the game is over. Because most of the time, your GM's happy to discuss those kinds of things, but after the game. Don't interrupt the game.
And yeah, and I totally agree with that. And but I'm also like when I was gaming, when I first started gaming, it was to first D&D and Buck Rogers. Yeah, that's pretty old school right there. With eating chips and soda and Funyuns, and we would play for a bit, and then somebody would get on a tangent of something else that was like geek related, and we talk about that for a bit and everything else, and it become like an all night event, which I'm totally fine with. I don't have an issue that if you're in a game and you're gaming and you go on tangents here and there, I don't really care because the point of this is all of us supposed to be hanging out and whatnot. It doesn't always have to be the entire game has to be in game, and if you wind up being out of game, everybody starts to flip out accordingly. You're there to have fun and socialize. So I'm pretty lax when it comes to that because if my players doing stuff and then they get on like talk about something else for a second or so or a couple minutes, I don't really care. Now, of course, if I'm doing one of the broadcasts, and since I'm dealing with pretty much everybody that's in my group, from what I've gathered, is all GMs. So when they're playing, they're pretty much all into it. But usually I start before the game start, before I go live. I have anywhere between 20 to 30 minutes of just BSing, and then we get into the game. And I think
Exactly.
that's
Good point.
I think that is important in game that you still at times just have just random stuff going on or what have you, or somebody plays something and that reminds them something in a movie they just see, and they're like, "Oh yeah, this is just like blah blah blah," and then they go on the tangent and they start talking about that there, and everyone else joins in, and everybody have a good time, and they're like, "Okay, all right, let's get back to the game and pull some more stuff up," and to me, them are usually the more funner games that you wind up dealing with than the ones that are everyone's in character 24/7. If you break character, everyone look at you menacingly like you committed a hate crime.
Oh man. Yeah, definitely. Um, you need to have some breathe room too. Like you're suggesting that 20, 30 minutes of bullshit that people talk about before the game. That's natural. You should incorporate that into your game because it helps people first re-socialize, reconnect, but get away from everything else and get ready to play the game. Have a break in the middle of your game. Have like a 10-minute break, 10-15 minute break, so people can just be like, okay, let's go to the washroom, let's grab another drink, let's just chat about something non-related. And even in your game, although it depends on what you're trying to do as a GM, if you're trying to convey like a horror setting, horror is not going to work if people are talking about Dumb and Dumber right in the middle of it. You're
Hmm.
going to lose the quote unquote magic that you got going on. Whereas something that's a little more like a high magic fantasy game, or just something that's a little more shits and gigs, then that's fine. As long as you want that and you're okay for that, you're all right with that. And when it comes to owning the table, that largely has to do with games where the responsibility is largely placed on one individual. When you have games that um, have everyone has a shared amount of investment, you could say everyone owns the table there. Like you're doing round robin GMing. Um, that's more of a situation where I can see the owning the table thing come out work, but yeah, just generally have breaks. You need breaks.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, because I know personally that the cool thing about Hangouts is you don't have to leave your house. The other thing that is a little bit, but then you still have to let people use the bathroom. The great thing is In Hangouts, people can put in BRB, and you automatically know they're gone, and then you can proceed to go through the other thing, just have them minus out the room or what have you. So that's some of the benefits that I like about the Google Hangouts, and the fact that if you get bored like I did this evening and say, "Hey, here's a link. We're going to talk about role playing and geeky stuff, and let's make this happen." Yeah, because like for tonight, the wife was complaining about my role playing books being all discombobulated because I have Palladium books everywhere. And I'm looking at this, and I got like one, two, three stacks of just Palladium books, which is kind of shocking. And I'm like missing books for some reason. But yeah, um, role play. That's the beautiful thing about Hangouts. You can pretty much just out the blue get bored and be like, I want to talk about gaming, and then you find fellow gamers who get online, and you have late night with Rex, and yeah.
Definitely. That really speaks to the RPG Brigade's pages and splinter kind of groups.
Hmm.
It is definitely nice to be able to just say, "Hey, I want to chat. Let's chat about some stuff that I don't really know anyone else in my local area to chat with." Um, that's definitely a benefit. But also, like you were saying earlier, much earlier, recording the games. That's an excellent tool just to look back on them. Um,
It is a
that's something
great
that's really
and it's
awesome.
also a great recruiting method because that way people can see your personal GM style and can determine from watching your game if they want to get hold of you about being in your next game or current game or what have you. So that's the other thing that I think is kind of cool. I'm actually going to be doing, I've been neglecting my Nightbane um, game that I have with my friend Jerry. It's just been me, basically me and him. We have one other individual, but yeah, I need to start posting that up and getting people involved in that because he's been wanting to play Nightbane for years and haven't been able to find anybody. And I've been the pseudo GM, but also with real life stuff going on and everything else, I haven't really got hold of him. But he's a great guy. He's currently working on a project that I'm working on to get demo material for Palladium because there are other game lines, in my personal opinion, is lacking demo stuff for when people go to the conventions to show off their thing. So I'm currently working on um, some of their other game lines. So like currently I'm getting a demo kit actually professionally set up with an actual module for splicers. And then we're working on stuff for Nightbane and Dead Rain, and then after that, there we're probably going to be moving on to um, After the Bomb. And what's the other one that they haven't done much for? And probably Beyond the Supernatural. So pretty much any game system that is not like the core focus outside of what you normally see from the play and book line, I'm planning to have demo material from. Because Rifts is great, but there's other people who like their other stuff, like Nightbane and Splicers and Ninjas and Super Spies, that all need demo material, which I'm planning to incorporate that, and I'm going to put that in the channel for the modern game players, which is basically um, um, that military PDF, which will basically give you access to basically modern day weaponry and give you the rate of fire and all that stuff. So pretty much the calculation that I personally came up with for players just to know is that I basically took however long the millisecond for your system is, and then divide that by the least amount of rounds. So, for example, the Christie, I think that was called. Let me find just an example of a gun that people know of. Okay, for example, everybody's probably seen SG1. So I took the F9 P90, and the rate of fire on that particular weapon is rate of fire is 50 rounds or 150, which basically means full auto 150. You shoot the whole thing off um, in one burst. But if you're doing other just regular semi-auto or what have you, it would take you about 8 rounds to unload a clip. That way, one player know how many clips they have access to that they can wind up firing off, and you can then determine whether or not that's a half action or full action to reload, or and also keep up with their ammo and everything else. And usually by 8 rounds, depending if you have multiple characters in the game, 8 rounds that wherever you're shooting at should be dead or close to it, unless you're dealing with something in the supernatural spectrum, and we all know that basically bullets don't work. It's
um,
something like
yeah.
salt and iron that you wind up having to kill the demon with.
That demo material you're talking about, I personally am a big fan of the idea, especially just like free demo material. Like you brought up conventions, but also just it's a great marketing tool to bring people into the hobby, but also so you can try out a new system, see what it's like without having to invest the extra cash to be able to get the book and read it through and find out, I don't really like this. Or I don't have anyone else around me who'd be interested in playing, like World of Darkness. I know no one in my personal circle at home that's willing to play World of Darkness. So it's just a good way to try something out.
Yeah, and I mean, World of Darkness is like one of the system where which depending on what game you're playing can be heavily action oriented or heavily politically oriented, like Games of Thrones oriented, as far as the difference between dealing with the prince and the vampires and infrastructure and power and greed and all that other stuff. So World of Darkness is great. I personally got books of it now. I've always been into werewolf. I've played vampire. If I play vampire, I'm not gonna lie. I'm gonna play one of the like old school, like older generations that got. I would be more of a political player where I would have minions and offshore accounts, and like I find out that you have a cousin in Burbank somewhere that I have kidnapped, and if you don't do what I want, she gets executed by dawn or something like that. There, that's the type of characters that I like playing, or the reluctant anti-hero.
Definitely. I don't know. A lot of people say the anti-hero is a character that is, or a character type that is getting pretty bland and dull. Um, I don't know. In a VFS or a Vancouver Film School story course that I took, it's definitely a trend that was brought up about the different kinds of protagonists that you can have,
Mm,
and the antagonist group is showing more. It's popping up more often. Some theories about that are just poor economic situations. People are in kind of shitty situations. They're not feeling that great about their future and whatnot. I don't know. I quite like antagonists um, and the I just forgot the term. It's quasi protagonist, quasi
mm,
or a
mhm.
half and half. Um, the mixed kind of player type of good versus evil, kind of a neutral moral. I have my own moral code style character. You can give them really interesting reasons as to why they are who they are and how they act, and just the reasons to why they act a certain way. You could do strange things like they wear gloves all the time. Maybe you could come up with a cool reason as to why they have that. And that could be said about any character. But the nice thing about these styles of characters or these types is that they're a little more believable to a degree. Um, a Luke Skywalker is not really as believable as I would say the Punisher. Um,
Mhm.
it's just something. Even if you take the settings out and just look at the characters themselves and their attitudes, I can relate a lot more with the Punisher than I can with Luke Skywalker, because I'm not much of a go-lucky, let's save the universe kind of person, and I think
Yeah,
most people can relate to that.
yeah. For me, is I've always been a fan of Japanese anime because, to be honest, a lot of the stuff that they do in anime you just can't do in film. So I watched recently Tokyo Ghoul, and it's basically the hero is basically a wimp. He's basically always getting beat up, always getting having the worst thing happen to him because he thinks that in order to protect or help everyone, he himself has to endure all this pain until he gets tortured at one point, and he basically becomes what in real life he needs to become the monster that everyone else is in order to save everyone. And that's the type of progression or stuff that I see in a lot in Japanese anime. They will take the struggling character or the reluctant hero, and through time and tribulations, he becomes a hero, not because he has to, it's because he needs to. And that's the type of character that I usually like watching, or because I can identify to being the underdog and then becoming, Mr. Badass.
Something more, yeah. The character you used the term for, which is excellent, awesome, is that the hero who doesn't want to be a hero, and they start off just not really interested in anything else, but through circumstance, they have to. They have to take action, um, and those again, they're way more relatable than a traditional protagonist who's kind of the blue-eyed, blonde-haired Luke Skywalker.
Yeah,
Um,
that character is called the reluctant hero. I mean,
yeah.
if you get like Heroes Unlimited as a prime as another gaming system that I like, they have that in there, and it's basically it pretty much describe what I said is that basically due a course of events, he is made to become the hero who has to protect everyone or save the city, or like Batman who say, I'm not the hero that the city I'm the hero that the city needs, but not necessarily wants. That type of
Mhm.
thing. So that is the type of character that I can relate to.
Definitely. And bringing them into a tabletop setting um, can really just add a new flair to your own character and the world, add another sense of believability. Maybe your character has to go adventuring or has to go on this job even though they're frightened of monsters or they're frightened of this drug lord or this particular individual in the maybe it's a car salesman who screwed him over and he has to go mug the guy or you have to go into the goblin's den and he's just fucking frightened of that, doesn't want to do it at all, but due to needing the reward, um, that just drives their desire to do something, like you were saying, the reluctant hero. But even with your, can't remember the term for it, but it's the mix of the good and bad character, more the neutral, moral ground standing
The
character.
anti-hero.
Anti-heroes. Thank you. With the anti-heroes, those are often a little more. They deal with a lot more of the I've been betrayed. Something bad has happened to me that has forced me to be this way. Um, that's a good. You can even start out with your antagonist as the. I forgot the term again. Holy.
Anti-hero.
You can tell it's late in the evening. Anti-hero, or early in the morning, I should say. You can have them build them as an anti-hero, or picture them as that to give them good reasons as to why they do what they do and how they justify their actions, and then tweak a few things, make them do certain negative actions. You could consider them a villain that way by having them do horrific things, or you can keep them in that neutral territory, and you could just have a protagonist versus the antagonist, or this is not going to work out, man. All the terms,
The
but
antagonist versus the anti-hero.
you can have the protagonist against the anti-hero. Because often your villains are more interesting as kind of anti-heroes, in my opinion.
Yeah,
Um,
I mean, Batman, Punisher are all classic anti-heroes. Technically, I mean, Spider-Man isn't really the anti-hero, but he's the reluctant hero
mhm,
character type 100% because at
definitely.
first he was just the carefree college guy who wanted to make some extra cash, and then because he got screwed over on the wrestling deal, he just ignored the robber who in turn later on wind up shooting his uncle. So if he did the right thing, his uncle will still be alive. So he has to deal with that whole
Regret.
interdrama, that whole regret drama type thing, which is always leads to some of the best characters ever. So you know Anti-heroes is something that I like playing, and if I get a character, if I get someone that plays anti-hero, I really like doing that. But another tool that I have in my GM bag, believe it or not, is the life path system that's in Cyberpunk. And I don't know if you're familiar with Cyberpunk, but basically the life path is you roll everything that happened to the age of your character. So basically what you do is you roll the character. So when you roll their life path, you basically make up their background from scratch. So if someone comes in your game, they don't have a background, you can have them roll the life path to their age set, and they have a complete background. And you, as a GM, now have additional information and tools to throw at them. So you can have, they might have a sordid love affair at age 22, so you can introduce that character later on, or their teacher died, or their parents were murdered, or they have a sister or brother that's lost, or whatever else. So the life path system is, in my personal opinion, is a thing that you can use for any gaming system, because all you basically do is roll the stats for it, write down what happens, and then give it to your GM, and now he has basically a full background of your life from pretty much from birth to your current age, and now he has a whole list of additional NPCs that he can use for your game. And then if all your players do that, then you have basically this wealth of information where you can draw upon during the course of a campaign.
I can vouch for that 100%. It's a really well detailed tool. But also going back to the whole discussions about anti-heroes, antagonists, and protagonists, it all comes down to making your characters interesting. If you have the blue-eyed, nice, save the world Luke Skywalker character, maybe that's the front they have that they show to everyone, but they've actually kidnapped an individual and left them in a cellar to die and come back every once in a while to torture them because that individual screwed them over, or that character thinks that they were wronged by this person, so they feel justified in committing this horrible act of torture. Um, it's just making your characters dynamic too. Have them change and maybe question their own choices, question how they treat other people and act. That's really the core of a lot of good role playing, a lot of good writing. Just you can see it in so many good movies, like you're saying, even animes. So many places these tools are used, and
Yeah,
there's
for
no reason
example,
you shouldn't use them.
yeah, a good example of that is kind of like if anyone's been following the Arrow, you basically hear how Oliver Queen's gone with the flashback of how what happened to him on while he was away. Um, you basically find out, at one point he had to torture someone, and when he didn't, a city block got blown up. So that's a real example of the anti-hero, because if anyone's followed the series, he pretty much winds up killing a bunch of people in the first series, and just known as the Hood, and now he's slowly becoming the Arrow, which eventually will become the Green Arrow, the actual hero slash Bruce Wayne type.
And that actually brings me to you're talking about the needs of the few versus the needs of the many, and that often gets brought up. And usually people go, "Oh, that's obvious. I just choose the needs of the many." Well, why not have your character say, "No, the needs of the few"? Like if they have to choose between a lover and some people they don't really care about in the village, why wouldn't they go for the lover? Um, that can be a really interesting moment for your character. One of my favorite antagonists, and eventually, well, he's an anti-hero and eventually becomes an antagonist, is Kane from Blood Omen 1, an old PlayStation game.
I know
And
exactly that gang.
he starts out as this noble that's a good guy, and he walks into a tavern and he asks for some food and drink because it's nighttime. Well, he gets shooed out, and some brigands decide, hey, look at this noble. Let's kill the guy. Take whatever he has. Well, Kane fights and dies. In hell, a necromancer revives him, makes a bargain with him, um, and Kane agrees, not realizing that he's being revived as the first vampire, and being manipulated in this large scheme to essentially kill off other important individuals But at the end, what I love about the whole thing is in the sequel, not Blood Omen 2, but Soul Reaver, it shows you the ending you're supposed to have chosen, or that's canon. Because in the end of the first game, you get to choose whether you will sacrifice yourself or you will save the world or you will save the world by killing yourself, or you are going to take the throne and rule the land and create your own family of vampires. Well, he does the latter. He screws over the entire world, which forms the basis of the entire Legacy of Kain and Blood Omen series. Is the consequences of his one action to be selfish, um, and that can be just a defining moment. He's one of my favorite antagonists for this. You can really feel something for this guy. You can empathize with him, and it's just good character, man.
Yeah, like example, like in X-Men First Class, when Magneto, and if spoilers, if you don't want to hear this, tune out at this point. When Magneto finally meets the guy that killed off his parents in Auschwitz, I myself, when he was doing that whole scene of killing off Kevin Bacon, was like, say to myself, justice. Because as far as I'm concerned, if you committed, just like in Chronicles of Riddick, sometimes you have to fight evil with a different type of evil. And that is something that I, always enjoy seeing. That sometimes being good is not always is the best. It doesn't work. Sometimes you have to just be as ruthless as evil as the people that you're dealing with.
Definitely. And that makes me think of another popular film a lot of people reference when making stealthy kind of characters is V from V for Vendetta. He tortures pretty much the protagonist throughout this to transform them into what he sees as an individual that is needed in this world. That period of transformation is an important aspect to your character, um, especially if you want to add a lot of flavors to them. I know I wasn't the same as to even like 4 years ago. I was not the same kind of person, or at least I've changed quite a bit. And you have to think about your characters in that way too. What were they like 10, well, 5, 10, 20 years ago? Um, that can really, you can have your characters kind of reflect on, I made this horrible decision, or I beat up the Schwartz kid, and I really shouldn't have. He did nothing wrong to me. I just was being part of the group. And it's those moments that are really just like, they flesh out your character, and they bring a new level. Bring the level up of your game from that to like through the fucking roof. So
Yeah, and I mean, it's always and they actually influence society. Like, let's be honest, before V for Vendetta even came out, no one really knew of the Guy Fawkes. Afterwards, you got like hacker groups like Anonymous and whatnot that's basically took that character and made it pretty much their mascot of being, pretty much, and has just started this whole stream of activism of like not letting, we won't be ignored. We will, if need be, riot to bring about change. Which, I always find fascinating how something as simple as media can influence the entire world. Which is something that, I mean, you can actually play out in Cyberpunk. You can actually be the rock star and cause people to literally riot in the streets because of something that you played.
definitely, that's a really neat idea. And there's this also stereotypical concept that demons or devils are controlling our mass media. But if you have a horror-based setting, you could have that literally happen. And like the symbology, yeah, it's there, but it can be just a neat way to get that point across. Because people don't people often look at the first thing they hear or read and will take that as fact. It's pretty common that people do that. I myself do that. I find myself doing that. And it's not until I am presented with an opposing view, just something different, that I start to go, whoa, oh, that's something I didn't know that. But what if I never ever got that? What if I
Mm,
learned that this band of adventurers has been slaughtering these individuals and they're coming our way. How am I going to react if the town crier has just been telling me this, or I've been reading my teleprompter, or not teleprompter, but like my television screen, or uh, any kind of, maybe listening to the radio, just some device where you get information. Um, I've been listening to that and what quote unquote Fox News has been telling me. Um,
Oh God.
oh God, I know. If you follow that, then you're going to have a very different, skewed, and biased view towards these adventurers who are coming into your town to do good. Um, that
Oh
can be
yeah.
a really neat way to do it. Maybe have rumors. That's a cool quest line. You're, regardless of setting, you have your characters show up, and the people around them already know of the adventurers or the protagonists, and they have this idea of who they are. Who's the person that started the rumor? How did that happen? How did everyone learn about it? Maybe they have the wrong description. So there's wanted posters of all these other strange people, but with the same names as you, and you get mistaken for them. Or
Oh
maybe
yeah.
it's intended for you, and they just have a horrible artist. So everyone's like, hey, you guys are newcomers. Watch out for this group of bad guys that's coming into town. Yeah, you're the people they're talking about. You can
Yeah.
do awesome stuff.
A great example of that is the newest Hercules film that came out, and basically uh, Hercules actually has a crew with him. But what happens is that he has basically the equivalent of a bard who goes around telling the legends of Hercules, and it becomes this mythos that he is basically a son of a god and blah blah blah. But what people don't know is that he has all these other people that he's come across in his adventures that has banded up with him, that's basically helped perpetrate the myth. So like when he took on the a me and lion, he actually had his crew came together and they all pretty much killed the lion together. But for the sake of getting more reputation and prestige, they, the story was read that he did this single handedly. So yeah, that's a that there to me is what you talked about is like a great example of that actually happening. Or the
Hmm.
mistaken identity, like the guy with one shoe, which I'm dating myself, but like that, I think that was a Tom Hanks movie where uh, people thought he was a secret agent. In actuality, he was just a regular schmo. But due to that one event, um, it lead to this whole misadventure, what have you, or the Born Identity, where the guy basically has no memory and then is on this quest to find out who he really is.
But please avoid amnesia at all costs. That's like a last resource for a character. Please, please avoid it. It's just so
Amnesia,
overdone.
amnesia, and then it becomes like it becomes a pain because then you got to have these things of dream sequences and all this other stuff that you have to slowly do, and then you have to deal with whether or not do they know this knowledge or don't know this knowledge, because according to their character sheet they're supposed to know, but because they have amnesia, it becomes a tool that comes a double-edged sword for a GM to deal with.
Definitely. And I've found it to be an excuse for players not to roleplay. I have amnesia. I don't need to. Um, I like to avoid those attitudes and just nip them in the butt. There's better thing. Amnesia is just a bottom of the barrel kind of idea or concept you can use. Yes, you can make it interesting. Do people? No. Most of the time, they don't.
Yeah, but that's usually when you're dealing with. That's pretty much when you're dealing with new game. When you got seasonal guys like me and yourself and people like Juice and all, I could totally see them doing an amnesia character and do it right and do the whole theater of the mind. But that's the difference between dealing with your new players and getting them to be seasoned than you know the straight out the boat type of character. And then that's also depending on what system you're trying to have them do it in. Because D&D, it could work. It can work in any system, but you can get blown up a lot quicker. Because if you go into a bar and let's say in the Rift universe, and you don't know that because you have amnesia that the guy you're sitting next to, you screwed him out of like a couple of million credits. You slept with his girlfriend, and you have no idea, and then he basically figures out that you don't recognize him, and he pulls out a blaster pistol and shoots you in the head, you don't really get a reaction time because you didn't think of it.
Not only
You get
that,
what I'm
but
saying?
that's for sure, definitely. And that not only is that a dangerous line to cross with some systems and how your GM runs it, but amnesia also kind of goes to the effect that you don't know what you're good at, you don't know what you're bad at. So you technically shouldn't get your skill bonuses unless you've tried something that only makes sense. You can't say, I'm going to tie this rope because I'm really good at tying ropes, or I know I can do it. Your character might not know anything, so what about that aspect? But along with that, something I like to do, and what I'm doing for a character that I'm going to be playing in the upcoming campaign, is I'm playing a female human rogue arcane trickster, just kind of the mechanical side of things. But she has had her tongue removed. It's been cut off, and she's been thrown into a cell for espionage, and that was her profession. But doing I get what I'm getting to is kind of the mutilation aspect of your characters. Bad things could have happened to them before they started. Like with this character, I'm lucky in the sense that due to her background, I'm able to get via with the help of the GM, grab certain spells that fit this theme that we've worked on to kind of establish my character, which is essentially some vampire-esque powers or a theme. The spells have to fall to suit that theme, um, but she can communicate telepathically or use telepathy. But I may not even do that, just not for the initial bit. I might just restrain myself to and all kinds of noises to communicate instead of voice. It seems counterintuitive, but it can be an interesting way to challenge yourself as a role player to use body language a lot. Not only that, but what if your character's lost a leg, or an arm, or a hand, or a couple fingers, an ear? Ears were commonly sliced off because that was a sign of you being a slave. That's how they could count you, so and sell you. So doing that kind of stuff can also add a neat flavor to your character. It sets you apart and can set up some interesting events in your game.
Hmm. Like I said, I mean, I've been gaming for so long and I ain't funny. I started back in like the early '80s. I started when Palladium Books was still doing advertisement and comic books, and comics was printed on news stock of paper. That's how long I've been into it. I was around. I've been playing since original Robotech. Actually, original Robotech was the first RPG I ever bought. The second was Cyberpunk.
I happen to have the original Robotech on my shelf right now. um,
I myself have Robotech, Macross 2, The Sentinels, and Robotech 2 role playing game. The Sentinels is basically Robotech 2, and then I have Macross 2. And then yeah, it just goes from there. But the first two role playing games I got my hands on was Robotech, Cyberpunk, and then Werewolf. And Werewolf became like Werewolf was just awesome. Because they weren't just savages; they had like their own clan system, and then they had these different spells they can do and different phases of the moon depending on like how what their personality types were. It was just awesome. And then they came out with Forsaken, and I was just like, this makes no sense. I had a problem with it when I was being told that vampires had a church. I'm old school. I don't do this whole twinkling vampire type stuff. Vampires are supposed to be dark and mysterious and, frightening, not twinkling, sparkling.
Teeny bopper shit.
Yeah, I can't do it. I can't do it. Now, look, I've been dying to see the new Dracula Untold story because it brings it back to, what vampires were supposed to be to that type of stuff, or when you hear about Lilith, the the mother of all monsters, stuff like that. That's the type of horror that I'm used to, or my favorite characters like vampires and werewolf. They're supposed to be frightening, not look like something off of a real world reality show.
Definitely. And even with werewolves, um, I personally prefer the older myths that had to do often with a woman becoming a werewolf during her period. That was like an old myth. But she would kill off her children and just be a savage throughout the area, not realizing what she's done. Just become a beast of the devil. Is kind of how people usually reference to anything mythological and evil.
Hmm.
But it's just brutal, absolutely brutal. You eat the corpses of the people you kill, and just slash through them. And I mean, there's tons of variations in terms of like wearing an actual skin. Like I know Native Americans have
Hmm.
their own myths on the kind of you wear an actual skin of a wolf and transform. Whereas some, it's more of a you're a human who can transform whatever you want. But I tend to prefer the more gothic horror style. This monster's going to rip your throat out, or this thing's going to lure you in and just make you its bitch. Not the as you're bringing up, not Jacob or Bella or the characters of Twilight. None of that shit.
Yeah, I actually, and you'd be jealous, as I was working the World Horror Convention over in Portland, and they had a book section. They had a dealer's room, and I managed to come across a book of basically it would be what a basically demon hunter would have or monster hunter would have. It was a
Oh
book
man.
of werewolfism. So and it was kind of cool because it looked like whoever had this book had little passages marked off, and I instantly thought that
Oh
was
man.
like this was some ancient some demons hunters reference material. So I had to pick it up, but it's great 'cause it covers like all the different myths and mythos behind werewolfism and lyranthropy and all that stuff. So
Nice.
it was a great find for like $2 or $3. I'm like, what
Oh,
is
two
this?
or three bucks? Oh
It was two
man.
or three bucks in this hardcover.
That's a crime. That's a crime.
No,
Sounds
but
like Van Helsing could
it'd be great for role playing if you're playing a demon hunter. Cause
oh
literally,
yeah.
yeah, cause it'd be like, what is this? And I throw down the book. This is what you need to read. We got werewolves about
Listening.
us.
Let me turn to page 104.
Yes, let me turn to page 4 of the book of lyranthropy,
Uh,
dated back, and then I can read off the copy back in da 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 date. Okay. Yes, here, right here. It tells you how to dispatch of the werewolf. You need wolfbane and silver. Or you can have it in the modern day say what they have this book and like, well, they spoke of wolfbane and silver, but we can also take it to the next level and do essence of wolfbane in a liquid form and shoot them with it and silver nitrate. Stuff like
oh,
that there.
there we go. Juve's the one with the plan. When the werewolf apocalypse happens, I'm going to Juve's.
Oh, dude, I got plans for days. I got plans for zombie infestation. I got werewolf, vampire. It really doesn't matter because I pretty much heard all the mythoses. So, all I really need is access to silver nitrate. My wife is a Pentecostal preacher, so I got holy water covered.
Oh
I got
man.
I
What
got
the fuck
Bibles all over this place.
man?
So if need be, if I'm dealing with demons, if I had to, I could cut out pieces of the Bible and stick it to a wall like demon wards. So yeah, I'm good. I'm good. I have nothing to worry about. I got enough blades and straight razor in this house to cut up anything.
That just makes me think of the scene in Hot Fuzz, a British comedy about
I
cops,
saw.
where they go to the farmer and they're like, "Do you have a license for that gun?" And he's like, "All right." So they walk into his gun bunker and they just have like military music playing and showing you fast shots of all the different places. I'm just picturing like you have a bunker as a basement and there's just like tons of guns and like holy water everywhere. You got all of these crucifixes and stakes and everything in like a big round table.
I mean, me and
Mountain
the
Dew
wife,
and Cheetos.
yeah, I mean, pretty much me and my wife have joked around. We've actually talked about getting a storage container. And I've actually got blueprints of how you could take one of them and make it into an underground bunker. And and I got friends that live in Portland that are preppers. So this whole concept is just, it's something that I could actually pull off if I had the cash. But it's also great for role play because and like especially in Dead Ring, they actually have the equivalent of the survivalist, aka the conspiracy theorist, in game. So I could totally like have like basically the zombie prepper who bought a bunch of stuff from Bud K and now armed to the teeth. I mean, realistically, you can go to Bud K and spend like $400 and have enough blades to take out, about 100 plus zombies.
Oh yeah. But that just makes me think of this hilarious moment where you could have a someone who's prepared for the zombie apocalypse and it ends up being a werewolf apocalypse. Just like,
Hmm.
oh shit, I was prepared for the wrong thing.
Oh yeah, I could totally see that as a whole role playing game right there. So you've been prepping for years. You got all these weapons. You got bullets and everything else, and then it comes out to be a vampire infestation. What are you gonna do?
Some
So you got
beautiful.
you got like 500 gallons of water. So what do? Do you get someone to bless all the water? Or like they did in Constantine, where they drop a crucifix into the water and becomes holy, and then all the vampires are pretty much screwed. And I always was curious, like, if you drunk holy water on a regular basis, does your blood become holy and therefore become acidic to vampires?
That's a fucking good question, man. That's a damn good question. That is so good.
Yeah, because if you drink silver nitrate, I mean, you can get silver nitrate, take it in pill form or whatever, and if you take that as your regular part of your diet, and then you also have basically all your water basically blessed holy water. Do that make you pretty much immune to everybody? Because if you do get attacked, they pretty much, your blood is like acid, like an alien, and they wind up choking and puking all over themselves accordingly.
You know what? They could, man. The only thing you'd have a problem with is aliens and mutants.
True. Aliens, you pretty much I've got. I remember years ago they actually said what they hunted on. And I think aliens hunted on kind of like a radar like type setup. That's why their head was so elongated. Kind of like they worked on sonar.
Mm.
So that's how that whole thing works. And of course, mutants. Mutant apocalypse. You still use bullets and blades without any issue. You just have to worry about vampires and werewolves.
Or if their blood is acid.
Then you're just screwed. You just might well just make sure you don't have anything corrosive on. Because it was fun. Me and my friend, because we were talking about we were joking around after seeing Kick-Ass about being vigilante heroes, right?
Mm.
So we went through this one catalog. And the funny thing is, if you ever look at Fox Motorsports equipment, they pretty much got everything you need to be a vigilante because they got the reinforced knuckles, they got the body armor, they got everything else. You can pretty much pick out your color scheme for your, superhero outfit, and you can get Kevlar off of eBay. You're pretty much set to go.
Man, don't be giving anyone ideas, man.
Hey, right now we have 0 viewers and a bunch of geeks. Every geek has had this conversation with another geek about becoming a vigilante hero and how they would personally do it. So yeah, I don't think I've given people any idea. I just think I'm reinforcing what they've already thought. And plus, the weird thing is, since I used to live in Portland, Seattle, we actually have superheroes that run the vigilante superheroes that run the streets. We definitely got. There's definitely one up in Seattle. I forgot what his name is. Some black guy, but he's like a vigilante superhero and what have you.
Oh man, it's pretty much expected that when that movie came out after the comic books, that no one would, well, someone would decide to be a vigilante in the
Well,
same vein.
the funny thing was before Kick Ass came out, they were already like all over the all over the United States. They had like these superhero like characters anyway.
Hmm.
That were basically just vigilantes. You can actually find it on Netflix. But it is getting late.
Yeah, yeah,
My wife needs my attention, so I'm going to go ahead and end this late night with Rex, the
yep.
first the first doing. So thank you again. I am Rex 8186. You can find me on YouTube. Please, sir, announce your channel.
So mine's Hollow Wanderer. My channel is the same. Basically, I talk about some of the stuff we chatted about here. Good stuff. Thank you for having me, Juve.
hmm
This was fun.
So I will see you later, and I'm going to go ahead and end the broadcast.